The word apocryphal comes from the Greek apokryphos, meaning hidden. In literature, the term is commonly used to designate books that were kept in secrecy, and in bibliology, it is used to identify religious works from the early church that lack canonical authority. In other words, they were not read in public worship because they were not considered the word of God given to humanity. It's important to note that the term apocryphal should not be considered pejorative, as their content may contain historical truths. Apocryphal Gospels are texts written in different periods, with many belonging to the early church and others from medieval times. This series will only provide commentary, curiosities, and references about these texts. The complete texts can be found online for free, and for this series, the translation by Professor Federico Lorenzo from the University of Coimbra, published in 2022, was consulted. This Gospel was possibly written around the year 150. The author's identity remains unknown, even though the text attributes itself to St. James. This Gospel was highly cited by early church intellectuals such as St. Clement of Alexandria, St. Justin, and Origen. Here, we are presented with the story of Mary, the mother of Jesus, from her miraculous conception, similar to the Jewish tradition of a promised child to barren parents. It is precisely on this canonical foundation that we will begin our episode. In the first book of Samuel, we have an account of the miraculous birth of the prophet. Hannah, mother of the prophet Samuel. And with grief in her soul, weeping bitterly, she made her prayer to the Lord. And she made an oath, and said, O Lord of armies, if you will truly take note of the sorrow of your servant, not turning away from me but keeping me in mind, and will give me a man-child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and his hair will never be cut. Now while she was a long time in prayer before the Lord, Eli was watching her mouth. For Hannah's prayer came from her heart, and though her lips were moving she made no sound, so it seemed to Eli that she was overcome with wine. And Eli said to her, How long are you going to be the worse for drink? Put away the effects of your wine from you. And Hannah, answering him, said, No, my lord, I am a woman whose spirit is broken with sorrow. I have not taken wine or strong drink, but I have been opening my heart before the Lord. Do not take your servant to be a good-for-nothing woman, for my words have come from my stored-up sorrow and pain. Then Eli said to her, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel give you an answer to the prayer you have made to him. And she said, May your servant have grace in your eyes. So the woman went away, and took part in the feast, and her face was no longer sad. And early in the morning they got up, and after worshipping before the Lord they went back to Ramah, to their house, and Elkanah had connection with his wife, and the Lord kept her in mind. Now the time came when Hannah, being with child, gave birth to a son, and she gave him the name Samuel, because, she said, I made a prayer to the Lord for him. And the man Elkanah with all his family went up to make the year's offering to the Lord, and to give effect to his oath. But Hannah did not go, for she said to her husband, I will not go till the child has been taken from the breast, and then I will take him with me and put him before the Lord, where he may be forever. 1 Samuel 1 verses 10-22. This Old Testament text is the first one we will use as a reference and introduction to the Apocryphal Gospel of James. Next, we will see, in the canonical Gospel of Luke, the same case with Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist. And they were without children, because Elizabeth had never given birth, and they were at that time very old. Now it came about that in his turn he was acting as priest before God. And as was the way of the priests, he had to go into the temple to see to the burning of perfumes. And all the people were offering prayers outside, at the time of the burning of perfumes. And he saw an angel of the Lord in his place on the right side of the altar. And Zacharias was troubled when he saw him, and fear came on him. But the angel said, "Have no fear, Zacharias, for your prayer has come to the ears of God, and your wife Elizabeth will have a son, and his name will be John." Luke 1 verses 7-13. Our next reference is in Judges, in the story of Manoah's wife, the mother of Samson. Now there was a certain man of Zorah of the family of the Danites, and his name was Manoah, and his wife had never given birth to a child. And the angel of the Lord came to the woman, and said to her, "See now. Though you have never given birth to children, you will be with child and give birth to a son." Judges 13 verses 2 and 3. And our final reference is in Genesis, in the birth of the offspring of Abraham, whose wife Sarah had her first child at an advanced age. This child was named Isaac, which means, "he will laugh," in Hebrew, because she laughed when she heard the promise of God from the mouth of the angel. And they said to him, "Where is Sarah your wife?" And he said, "She is in the tent." And he said, "I will certainly come back to you in the spring, and Sarah your wife will have a son." And his words came to the ears of Sarah who was at the back of the tent door. Now Abraham and Sarah were very old, and Sarah was past the time for giving birth. And Sarah, laughing to herself, said, "Now that I am used up am I still to have pleasure, my husband himself being old?" And the Lord said, "Why was Sarah laughing and saying, Is it possible for me, being old, to give birth to a child? Is there any wonder which the Lord is not able to do? At the time I said, In the spring, I will come back to you, and Sarah will have a child." Then Sarah said, "I was not laughing, for she was full of fear." And he said, "No, but you were laughing." Genesis 18 verses 9-15. From now on, after this quick review of these biblical passages, we begin to discuss the Apocryphal Gospel of James. The similarity between the account of Mary's birth and the birth of the prophet Samuel coincides in the narrative and also in the names of the mothers, Anna. Just as in the stories of the Hebrew Old Testament, Mary's birth occurs miraculously. Like Anna, the mother of the prophet Samuel, Anna, Mary's mother, laments daily the fact of being barren, and her husband, Joachim, questions why they have not been blessed with offspring. One day, as Anna laments, an angel appears to her and announces that she will give birth to a child, and that her descendants will be known throughout the world. Anna, Mary's mother, promises that regardless of the child's gender, it will be taken to serve in God's temple. Joachim is then informed that his wife will conceive. Similar to Samuel, Mary is taken to live in the temple with the priests, in Samuel's case, the tabernacle. It's interesting to note that the names of Mary's parents, Anna and Joachim, do not appear in the canonical Bible. They are known popularly through church tradition, a tradition rooted in the apocryphal texts. Mary spends her childhood and pre-adolescence in the temple, where she stands out for her virtues. When Mary turns 12, the priests contemplate what to do with her so that, in their words, she does not defile the Lord's sanctuary, indicating her first menstruation. Zacharias, the high priest, prays for guidance on what to do. An angel instructs him to gather widowers, each with a rod, and the one on whom God shows a sign will be chosen. As expected, the sign occurs with Joseph's staff, the carpenter. Joseph complains, being too old to take a young girl as his wife, but the priest rebukes him, and he accepts the decision. Joseph takes Mary to his home and leaves to work on his constructions. Here, when Joseph takes Mary home, they do not marry immediately, waiting for the right time. This seems to take years, as when Christ is conceived in Mary's womb, she is already 16, having left the temple at 12 when she began menstruating. Unlike the Gospel of Matthew, the families of Mary and Joseph live in the outskirts of Jerusalem and Bethlehem, with Nazareth not mentioned. While Joseph is away working, Mary receives a visit from the angel who announces the miraculous birth of Jesus. The difference in Jesus' miraculous birth from the Old Testament narratives, John the Baptist, and Mary's own birth lies in the fact that Jesus is conceived without sexual relations. Mary visits her cousin Elizabeth and spends 3 months with her, a narrative similar to the Gospel of Luke. Joseph returns after 6 months of work, and upon seeing Mary pregnant, he despairs and questions her. She insists she doesn't know and remains a virgin. Joseph is afraid to assume the child because they are not yet married, fearing it would violate the trust given to him as the guardian. If he accused her of adultery, she could be judged and sentenced to death. Joseph decides to separate quietly but changes his mind after the angel visits him in a dream. The high priest discovers Mary and Joseph's pregnancy and subjects them to an interrogation where nobody believes their story. Similar to the test for choosing Mary's husband, their testimony is accepted with God's witness. This gospel also recounts the historical event mentioned in Luke, the census ordered by Emperor Caesar Augustus, which requires Joseph to register in Bethlehem. On the way, Mary asks to dismount because the child is about to be born. Joseph finds a cave, where he leaves Mary and seeks a Hebrew midwife for assistance. The Gospel suggests that Joseph leaves his children in Mary's care. This Gospel also emphasizes the naturalness with which invasive topics related to the female body were treated. Menstruation remains a sign of impurity, and that's why Mary has to leave the temple at 12. Years later, when giving birth to Christ, Joseph seeks a midwife and tells her that Mary is his fiancée, not his wife, and that she had a son through the Holy Spirit, without carnal contact. The midwife announces this miracle, and Salome, a woman named here, says she will only believe if she can verify the girl's virginity with her own hands. And yes, she performs the test and believes in the virgin birth. James' account seems to want to emphasize Mary's virginity as an important part of the Christian faith, a custom that was already common in the Middle East and the Caucasus, where this custom is still alive. The same happens in some Roma groups. The wise men arrive in Bethlehem, causing great commotion. King Herod, desperate, questions the high priests and the wise men. The wise men present gifts to Jesus while the family is still in the cave. The gifts are the same: gold, incense, and myrrh. King Herod orders the massacre of children up to 2 years old, leading Mary to hide Jesus in the oxen's manger, specifically mentioned, and Elizabeth flees with the young John the Baptist. This gospel also includes successive fantastic events, from Salome's hand disintegrating in fire after the test with Mary to Joseph being chosen as Mary's husband because a dove comes out of his staff and lands on his head, even to the mountain opening in great light to shelter Elizabeth and her baby John so they can hide from King Herod's fury. The death of Zacharias is also narrated here, murdered by Herod's guards for refusing to reveal the whereabouts of his son and wife. His blood is spread in the temple, and a voice says it will only be cleansed when his avenger arrives. This idea of revenge, contrary to the preaching of the canonical Gospels, strongly resembles medieval Christian traditions and legends, such as the Holy War rewarded by God or the appearance of Santiago Matamoros in the Christians' war against the Moors in the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula. Simeon was chosen to replace Zacharias, the one who, in Luke's Gospel, blesses Jesus and verbalizes that God's promise, that he would see the Messiah before he dies, has been fulfilled. Here, the promise is also mentioned. The Gospel ends here, and it's challenging to imagine who the author James would be, as he claims to have hidden in the desert to escape the disturbance when Herod died. It doesn't seem to be the Apostle James but rather a local chronicler. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus is born in a stable attached to an inn, in Matthew's at home, and in this Gospel, he is born in a cave in Bethlehem, the one most commonly portrayed in nativity scenes worldwide during Christmas. Many medieval paintings also depict the nativity in a cave. The report of this Gospel has been adapted to cinematography more than once. From memory, I recall Mary and Joseph, A Story of Faith, from 1979, Joseph of Nazareth, from 1999 and Mary, Daughter of Her Son, from 2000. This film has no intention of stirring controversy on the subject, mainly because there is no reason to do so. For a long time, discussions about whether the apocryphal texts should be read or not have overshadowed the actual reading and reflection on these books. They are as historical as the other books of the Christian Bible, and in them, we find the roots of many Christian traditions worldwide. It's also worth noting that the Christian Bible differs among different denominations because there are variations between the Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant Bibles in the number of books in each canon. To comprehend and reflect on the apocryphal texts, the same exercise used to study the Bible and any other historical writing must be done: understand the time, place, culture, language, in short, the historical context. Things that were common 100 years ago might be unacceptable today, so it's reasonable to assume that 2,000 years ago, the shock would be even greater, which is not exclusive to the Bible or religion but rather a feature of history. Therefore, in the case of this series, which will only address the apocryphal Gospels, we have the opportunity to consult other sources about the people who lived with Christ and about Christ himself, as there is a fact that does not differ from the canonical Gospels: everything written about Christ was written by people around him. Jesus himself left nothing in writing. And I say only the apocryphal Gospels because there are also apocryphal books from the Old Testament and epistles. Curiosity about the facts of Christ's life and the origins of the Christian religion and traditions is present in various groups in our society. We are Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants, Pentecostals, Jews, Muslims, atheists, agnostics, historians, and also curious lay people who can be in any of the previous groups. The series was made with the intention of satisfying some of the endless interest in what is undoubtedly the greatest historical figure in humanity, Jesus Christ.